10 Unsolved Crimes and Mysteries from the American Old West. A ship isn't usually something you associate with the Wild West. The American West has long been a place for cowboys, gunslingers, and hidden treasure. However, there's been questions about the true fate of certain outlaws, along with other mysteries that have fascinated people for around 100 years, and that have never been solved or explained by modern historians. 1. Butch Cassidy's death. Born Robert LeRoy Parker in Beaver, Utah, on April 13, 1866, the bandit who assumed the alias Butch Cassidy remains an icon of the Old West even 150 years after his birth. As with many legendary outlaws, Cassidy's life was shrouded in mystery and folklore, but even murkier are the facts surrounding his death. Did Butch Cassidy die with his partner in crime, the Sundance Kid, in a shootout with Bolivian authorities as is commonly thought, or did he actually return to the United States to quietly live out his final years? As Carlos Burro encouraged his mule to lumber up a rugged trail high in the Andes Mountains on the morning of November 4, 1908, little did the courier for the Armeo, Frank and CIA Mining Company realize that his every move was being watched. Burro later recounted that after cresting a hill, he was surprised by two Yankees, whose faces were covered with bandanas and whose rifles were cocked and ready to fire. The pair of masked bandits robbed the courier of the company's payroll, and then disappeared into the cacti-dotted desolation of southern Bolivia. 3 days later, a quartet of Bolivian authorities cornered a pair of Americans suspected of being the perpetrators in a rented house in the dusty village of San Vicente. The Pinkerton Detective Agency, which had been on the trail of Butch Cassidy and Harry Longaball, known as the Sundance Kid, for years had warned banks across South America to be on the lookout for the duo who had fled there from the United States in 1901, and later accounts reported those were the identities of the two Americans holed up in San Vicente. As a Bolivian soldier approached the hideout, the Americans shot him dead. A brief exchange of gunfire ensued. After it subsided, San Vicente Mayor Cleto Bellot reported hearing 3 screams of desperation followed by a single gunshot, then another, from inside the house. When the Bolivian authorities cautiously entered the hideout the following morning, they found the bodies of the 2 foreigners. The man thought to be the Sundance Kid was slumped against a wall with bullet wounds to his body and a gunshot to his forehead. The man believed to be Cassidy was next to him on the floor with a bullet hole to his temple. Contrary to the 1969 film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, in which the outlaws go down in a blaze of glory amid a hail of bullets, it appeared that Cassidy had shot his wounded partner between the eyes before turning the gun on himself. At an inquest, Burro identified the corpses as those of the thieves who had ambushed him, although all he had ever seen of the masked men were their eyes. But neither Burro nor anyone else ever positively identified the 2 dead men as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid before their reported burial in an unmarked grave in a San Vicente cemetery. Although descriptions of the deceased bandits bore some resemblance to the legendary robbers, no photographs of the bodies were ever taken to provide proof. With no conclusive evidence to confirm the deaths of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, rumors took root that the pair had once again eluded the long arm of the law, and sightings of the duo in South America, Mexico and the United States continued for decades to come. Family members fueled the stories by insisting that the men had never been killed and instead returned to the United States to live into old age. Cassidy's sister, Lula Parker Bettinson, wrote in her 1975 book Butch Cassidy, My Brother, that the outlaw had returned to the family ranch in Circleville, Utah, in 1925 to visit his ailing father and attend a family wedding. According to Bettinson, Cassidy told the family that a friend of his had planted the story that one of the men killed in Bolivia was him so that he would no longer be pursued. She claimed that Cassidy lived in the state of Washington under an alias until his death in 1937. Bettinson said her brother was buried in an unmarked grave in a location that was kept a family secret. For decades, husband and wife researchers Daniel Buck and Ann Meadows mined South American archives and police reports seeking to track down the true story of what happened to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, a saga that Meadows detailed in her book Digging Up Butch in Sundance. While the paper trail pointed to their demise in Bolivia, conclusive evidence as to the identities of the bandits killed in San Vicente, in November 1908 rested under the ground of the village's cemetery. The researchers enlisted the help of Clyde Snow, the renowned forensic anthropologist who had conclusively identified the remains of Nazi war criminal Joseph Mengele, and received permission from Bolivian authorities to exhume the robbers' bodies. Guided to their purported grave by an elderly villager, whose father had reportedly witnessed the shootout, diggers in 1991 unearthed the skeleton of one man along with a piece of a skull from another. After a detailed forensic analysis and a comparison of DNA to the relatives of Cassidy and Longley, Snow found there was no match. The skeleton was instead likely to have been that of a German miner named Gustav Zimmer, who had worked in the area. It's possible that the bodies of the iconic desperados remain buried elsewhere in the San Vicente cemetery or even outside of its walls. Without any conclusive proof of the whereabouts of the bodies of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, however, their ultimate fate remains a mystery. 2. Victorio Peak Treasure. The mystery boils down to a single question: was Milton, Doc, Noss telling the truth, or just a tall tale? The answer could be worth billions of dollars. It is one of the most celebrated legends of buried treasure in the history of the American West, a thriller that includes a gunfight, nuclear weapons and the Watergate hearings. It all started in 1937, when Mr. Noss, who practiced as a foot doctor though it was never clear if he had a medical license, returned from a hunting trip at New Mexico's Victorio Peak with startling news. He had glimpsed a hidden trove of riches, 16,000 gold bars. Decades of searching. Ever since then, driven by a desire to become fabulously wealthy, Mr. Noss himself, his descendants, investors and soldiers at White Sands Missile Range, which includes Victorio Peak, have gone in time after time searching for treasure, but have always come up empty. Now, cleared to go by an act of Congress, the best-equipped search ever is underway with $1 million in backing from the descendants and some investors. It could finally solve the mystery. We have always believed that the gold was still there, said Terry Delness, the 43-year-old son of one of Mr. Noss's stepdaughters who is directing the search. In a hunt that began last Thursday, Mr. Delness's group has been given 1 year to search for the gold. The Army, which runs the missile range, required the searchers to put up $150,000 to cover the cost of environmental assessments, as well as increased security forces. The family believes that as much as 100 tons of gold, which would be worth $1.25 billion, at today's closing price of $358.90 an ounce on the Commodity Exchange in New York, remains hidden in the cavern. They believe that sophisticated equipment like devices to take soundings showing whether there are underground caves will help this search succeed where other ventures fail. The initial soundings appear to indicate a cavern precisely where Mr. Noss described. Under the direction of Mr. Delness, the searchers have been analyzing their findings in a temporary office at Las Cruces, about 25 miles south of Victoria Peak. Searching with 15 people at a time, to try to determine the size of the cave, the group in a few weeks plans to start drilling 6-inch holes several hundred feet deep into the areas where the soundings show the cave is. Mr. Noss, a traveling doctor who was known for a hot temper and an appetite for liquor, claimed that the cache consisted of Spanish artifacts and Wells Fargo chests, along with the gold. He supposedly told his wife, "We can make John D. Rockefeller look like a tramp." According to the family, Mr. Noss took some gold bars when he found the cavern in 1937, and planned to return for the rest. But while trying to blast his way to the gold in 1939, he accidentally closed the hole. A partner and a gunfight. For the next few years, Mr. Noss sought partners to help him find the gold. During World War II, he divorced his wife, Ova, and disappeared for several years. Ova Noss took up the search, without success. Mr. Noss returned in the late 1940s with a new wife, and a business partner. He remained steadfast in his belief that the treasure remained, according to family members. But in a dispute over the treasure in 1949, the business partner, Charlie Ryan, shot Mr. Noss to death. A jury ruled that Mr. Ryan had acted in self-defense. Mr. Noss's ex-wife was barred from searching in the 1950s, when the Army extended the White Sands borders to include Victorio Peak. White Sands is the nation's largest military installation, about the size of Delaware and Rhode Island combined. The world's first atomic bomb was detonated here on July 16, 1945. Topic at Watergate hearings. After some airmen from a nearby Air Force base claimed they found some gold at Victorio Peak, the Army and Secret Service began a secret search in 1961. Two local ranch workers stumbled upon the search and notified Mrs. Noss. She appealed to state officials, who forced the search to stop. The Army says the gold was never found. In 1963, the Army allowed a group of searchers, including Mrs. Noss, to search for the gold. But the expedition soon went broke, and the Army declared that it would allow no more searches. But the legend of the hidden gold was fueled again, during the Watergate hearings in 1973. John Dean, the former lawyer for President Richard M. Nixon, mentioned that Attorney General John Mitchell had been asked to pull strings to allow some searchers to look for the gold. Suddenly, a host of people surfaced to lay claims on the legendary gold treasure. The flamboyant lawyer F. Lee Bailey once said he represented 50 unnamed clients. Mr. Bailey claimed that given a helicopter and a half hour, he could find 292 gold bars. Mr. Bailey later dropped the matter. But in 1977, the Army agreed to allow some searchers with competing claims, including Mrs. Noss, to search the grounds. They found nothing. Through the years, soldiers at White Sands have spent weekends looking for the gold. Like any other client, parts of White Sands are sometimes leased by private corporations and foreign governments for experiments. American and foreign car makers have rented land at the installation to test new airbags. "We're treating the gold searchers just like any other client," said Jim Eccles, a spokesman for the White Sands Range. Mr. Delnaz said the legend of the buried treasure obsessed the family for generations. As a child, he said he remembered his grandmother, Ova Noss, talking about it ceaselessly. He said he often grew angry that his grandmother was ignored or ridiculed for her efforts. In 1979, he sold a small mail-order business to devote full time to the search. He has recruited friends and investors to form the Ova Noss Family Partnership, named for his late grandmother, that is financing the new search. If nothing else, he said, an exhaustive search would lay to rest a question that has driven the family for more than 50 years. Map of New Mexico showing location of White Sands Missile Range. 3. Bill Longley's execution. Outlaw Wild Bill Longley twice cheated the noose, but popular Texas folklore that he got away a third time is wrong. Scientists say tests of the body in his grave show that it is, indeed, Longley. We now can put the controversy to rest. Bill Longley has been dead 123 years and it's good to have it all cleared, Michael Reese of Houston, a Longley descendant, said Wednesday. Reese attended a briefing at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History where forensic anthropologist Douglas Ousley described his 15-year effort to track down Longley's grave and solve the question of who, if anyone, was in it. Longley, an outlaw with a fast draw and a faster temper, was said to have killed 32 people in the years after the Civil War. His tale was romanticized in the television series The Texan, where the character Big Bill Longley was played by Rory Calhoun. "We believe this is William Preston Longley," Ousley said, unveiling the remains recovered from the grave. Dr. Terry Milton of Metatyping Technologies in State College, PA, reported that DNA recovered from one of the teeth and the burial matched that of Helen Chapman, a granddaughter of Longley's sister. And Ousley noted that the casket contained a Catholic religious medal and the remains of a celluloid flower that Longley was known to have had with him on the scaffold. Twice Longley had cheated death. Once, He was hung by vigilantes who then turned and began shooting at him while one bullet severed the rope, allowing him to flee. Then, on October 11, 1878, on Sheriff James Madison Brown's first try to hang him, the rope proved too long, and he dropped to the ground. Deputies then hoisted him up and, 11 minutes later, he was pronounced dead. And the legend began. Folklore insists that the last hanging was a hoax, thanks to a bribed sheriff. The original long rope prevented Longley's neck from being broken, and he didn't strangle because the rope was really attached to a harness under his clothing. That's the folklore, at least. The tales say his casket was filled with stones, and he lived on for many years, settling in Louisiana. That's where Owsley got involved. In 1986, he was teaching at Louisiana State University when Ted Wax of Gonzales, Law, asked him to help sort out his family history. Wax's mother had died, and in her papers, he found an indication that his grandfather, named Brown, had been wanted for murder in Texas under the name Longley. Owsley said his findings show that the Louisiana Man and Wild Bill Longley were not the same. The major problem was finding the grave that held the desperado, one of the first two-gun fast-draw experts. His resting spot was unmarked and outside the cemetery in Giddings, Texas, where he finally met his end. The cemetery where he was buried grew, trees died and new ones were planted. The scene changed. A petrified wood marker was placed on Longley's grave in the 1920s, but the caretaker's records indicate the marker was later moved for various reasons. As the marker was moved, the body lay where it had been buried. Elderly members of the Longley family were unsure of the location of the grave, so Owsley turned to LSU geologist Brooks Elwood. An expert in remote sensing, Elwood used a variety of methods including magnetometers, electrical resistance testing and earth samples in the search for the grave. Finally they found a photo taken of the marked grave in the 1930s. Using computer digital imaging, they were able to compare it with photos of the cemetery taken today, deleting headstones installed since the picture was taken. They located the spot, coordinating on 3 old trees and 5 grave markers. And there they found the unmarked grave. After the Civil War, Longley and other young toughs began a campaign of terrorizing newly freed slaves. Later he worked as a cowboy in Kansas and Texas and at one time, claimed to have been involved in 32 killings. He had a $1,000 reward on his head. He was arrested in 1873, but when the reward wasn't paid, he was set free. 3 years later he was arrested again, but escaped in the confusion after setting the jail on fire. The final arrest came in 1878. He was tried and sentenced to death for murder. Just before his hanging, he reduced his claimed toll to just 8 killings and decided to join the Roman Catholic Church. 4. Cochise's burial site. Chief Cochise, one of the great leaders of the Apache Indians, in their battles with the Anglo-Americans, dies on the Chiricahua Reservation in southeastern Arizona. Little is known of Cochise's early life. By the mid-19th century, he had become a prominent leader of the Chiricahua Band of Apache Indians living in southern Arizona and northern Mexico. Like many other Chiricahua Apache, Cochise resented the encroachment of Mexican and American settlers on their traditional lands. Cochise led numerous raids on the settlers living on both sides of the border, and Mexicans and Americans alike began to call for military protection and retribution. War between the U.S. and Cochise, however, resulted from a misunderstanding. In October 1860, a band of Apache attacked the ranch of an Irish-American named John Ward, and kidnapped his adopted son, Felix Tellez. Although Ward had been away at the time of the raid, he believed that Cochise had been the leader of the raiding Apache. Ward demanded that the U.S. Army rescue the kidnapped boy, and bring Cochise to justice. The military obliged by dispatching a force under the command of Lieutenant George Bascom. Unaware that they were in any danger, Cochise and many of his top men responded to Bascom's invitation to join him for a night of entertainment at a nearby stage station. When the Apache arrived, Bascom's soldiers arrested them. Cochise told Bascom that he had not been responsible for the kidnapping of Felix Tellez, but the lieutenant refused to believe him. He ordered Cochise be kept as a hostage until the boy was returned. Cochise would not tolerate being imprisoned unjustly. He used his knife to cut a hole in the tent he was held in and escaped. During the next decade, Cochise and his warriors increased their raids on American settlements, and fought occasional skirmishes with soldiers. Panicked settlers abandoned their homes, and the Apache raids took hundreds of lives, and caused hundreds of thousands of dollars in property damages. By 1872, the U.S. was anxious for peace, and the government offered Cochise and his people a huge reservation in the southeastern corner of Arizona Territory if they would cease hostilities. Cochise agreed, saying, "The white man and the Indian are to drink of the same water, eat of the same bread, and be at peace." The great chief did not have the privilege of enjoying his hard-won peace for long. In 1874, he became seriously ill, possibly with stomach cancer. He died on this day in 1874. That night his warriors painted his body yellow, black, and vermilion, and took him deep into the Dragoon Mountains. They lowered his body and weapons into a rocky crevice, the exact location of which remains unknown. Today, however, that section of the Dragoon Mountains is known as Cochise's stronghold. About a decade after Cochise died, Felix Tellez, the boy whose kidnapping had started the war, resurfaced as an Apache-speaking scout for the U.S. Army. He reported that a group of Western Apache, not Cochise, had kidnapped him. 5. Lost Dutchman's Gold Mine. One legendary treasure that has led many astray and ruined many lives is the Lost Dutchman Mine, supposedly located in the Superstition Mountains east of Phoenix, Arizona. As with most legends, there are many discrepancies among the various accounts. According to Helen Corbin, author of The Curse of the Dutchman's Gold, in 1846, a man named Jacob Waltz emigrated from Württemberg, Germany, to the United States. After he became a naturalized American citizen in July 1861, he traveled to Arizona and became a prospector. Sometime between 1872 and 1878, Waltz and his partner, Jacob Weissnor, reportedly found gold in an 18-inch wide vein of quartz. They mined some ore and placed it in a cache near the mine. One day, while working on the mine, Weissnor was killed by the Apaches. Upset by Weissnor's death, Waltz never filed a claim for the mine. He concealed its entrance, took only the ore that he needed to live on, and moved to Phoenix, where he lived in an adobe house on a small farm near the Salt River. There, he earned his living by delivering fresh eggs to a woman named Julia Thomas, who owned a local bakery and knew nothing of Waltz's mine. One day in 1891, Waltz discovered that Julia was in debt and in danger of losing her bakery, and he offered to help her repay her debts. Until the moment that he showed her gold ore worth about $1,500, Julia thought he was a poor farmer. Waltz told her that he would ship the gold to a smelter in San Francisco. "I've shipped gold from Casa Grande in the past," he said. "I'm familiar with the procedure. When the money comes back, I'll lend most of it to you." He continued, "There's a great deal more where that came from. It's in a cache that we made, my partner and one. The gold came out of a mine, of course. I have the right to work that mine, but I gave that up after my partner was killed. He was killed by the Apaches 20 years ago, and I never wanted to work in the mine again. Anyway, I'm getting too old for that kind of thing now." He promised to share the wealth of the mine with Julia and her adopted son, Reinhard Petrask. They planned a trip into the Superstitions during the spring of 1892 to retrieve the rest of the gold in Waltz's cache. Unfortunately, Waltz's house was swamped that summer when the normally dry Salt River was flooded with runoff from torrential rains. Waltz caught pneumonia from his drenching and died on October 25, 1891, months before he could take Julia and Reinhardt into the Superstitions. Shortly before his death, he reportedly told them that a small amount of gold ore was hidden beneath his fireplace, and he sketched a map giving the location of the mine. Not only did they not find the mine, they were even robbed of the gold ore that Waltz had left them. The bare-bones account of this story has been enough to send thousands of treasure hunters into the superstitions, where some have died, sometimes under mysterious and rather gruesome circumstances. For most searchers, greed replaced common sense except in a few treasure trackers. 6. Pancho Villa's head. Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa was born Doro Tuarongo on June 5, 1878, in San Juan del Rio, Durango. Villa spent much of his youth helping out on his parents' farm. After his father's death when Villa was only 15 years old, he became head of the household. With his new role as protector of his household, he shot a man who was harassing one of his sisters in 1894. He fled, spending 6 years on the run in the mountains. While there, he joined a group of fugitives and became a bandit. Although the specifics of what occurred in Villa's life during this time are unknown, it's confirmed that he changed his name while on the run, to avoid getting caught by the authorities. In the late 1890s, he worked as a miner in Chihuahua in addition to selling stolen cattle. But it wasn't long before he added more serious crimes to his record, robbing banks and taking from the wealthy. Mexican revolutionary leader. In 1910, while still living as a fugitive, Pancho Villa joined Francisco Madero's successful uprising against Mexican dictator Porfirio Diaz. With Villa's skills as at reading, writing, fighting and his knowledge of the land, Madero was named a revolutionary leader, and his company won the First Battle of Ciudad Juarez in 1911. The rebels eventually drove Diaz out of power, and Madero took the position of president, having named Villa colonel. It wasn't smooth sailing under the authority of the new government, as Madero's position was challenged by another rebellion, this time led by Pascual Orozco, a revolutionary who worked with Madero, and felt scorned by his position in under Madero's regime in 1912. General Victoriano Huerta and Villa sought to protect Madero's newfound authority, but after Huerta accused Villa of stealing his horse, Villa's execution was ordered. Although Madero was able to grant Villa a reprieve shortly before his execution, he was still required to serve time in prison in June 1912. After escaping in December, it was revealed that Huerta was now against Madero's regime, and he assassinated Madero on February 22, 1913. As Huerta rose to power, Villa teamed up with a former ally, Emiliano Zapata, and Venustiano Carranza to overthrow the new president. As an experienced revolutionary leader, Villa controlled much of northern Mexico military forces during the revolt. Known as División del Norte, or Division of the North, Villa led soldiers into battles by the droves, to the pleasure of onlookers the United States. The U.S. supported Villa in more ways than simply behind a lens. After the numerous battles that occurred, Carranza rose to power in 1914. Disappointed with Carranza's skills as a leader, a rebellion broke out yet again, with Villa joining forces with Zapata and President Woodrow Wilson to bring down Carranza. With Mexico's move towards democracy under Carranza, Woodrow withdrew his support of Villa the following year, leading to Villa kidnapping and killing 18 Americans in January 1916. Only months later, on March 9, 1916, Villa led several rebels in a raid of Columbus, New Mexico, where they ravaged the small town and killed 19 additional people. Wilson retaliated by sending General John Pershing to Mexico in order to capture Villa. Despite Carranza's support in searching for Villa, the two hunts that occurred in 1916 and 1919 for the Mexican rebel produced no results. In 1920, Carranza was assassinated and Adolfo de la Huerta became the president of Mexico. In an effort to restore peace to the unstable nation, de la Huerta negotiated with Villa for his withdrawal from the battlefield. Villa agreed and retired as a revolutionary in 1920. He was killed 3 years later on July 20, 1923, in Parral, Mexico. He was buried in Chihuahua, Mexico at Hidalgo del Parral. 3 years later, his tomb was broken into and his body was decapitated. Grave robbers exhumed his body and removed parts of the corpse, specifically his head. It's never been discovered what happened to his head, but there are many stories and rumors. When his remains were moved in a monument to the revolution in Mexico City in 1976, his family says only a few bones were left. 7. Thunderbirds. One of the West's most fascinating cold cases involves a flying monster, a dying town and a disappearing photograph. For decades, people have been trying to solve the mystery of the Thunderbird photograph. True West doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but we have some, and they give a pretty clear picture of what happened to the picture that has been the source of such angst and wonderment all these years. Let's just say that it is a mystery to us that the Thunderbird photograph is still a mystery. Let's go back to how this Thunderbird photograph story got started. It was 1963 and Jack Pearl's article in what some call the sensationalistic men's magazine saga. He claimed the epitaph printed the photo in 1886. He was wrong on all counts. The Tombstone Epitaph staff members went back in the late 1960s, searching for the photo so it could solve this Old West mystery. They couldn't find one. One wasn't printed with the original article, and the paper didn't publish a follow-up article. Plus Pearl is wrong on the year. The incident didn't even happen until 1890. Others searched newspapers around the country. Remember, Cranmer claimed the photo had been published nationwide, and no photo was found. Amateur sleuths who were certain they'd seen the photo in a certain book went back, and found the book did not contain such a picture. Taylor himself has done considerable sleuthing, and came back empty-handed. "I swear that I saw it myself," he tells True West. It's strange that so many people remember seeing the photo, including many very, very reliable people. Just last year, Cryptomundo.com published 2 photos and a drawing, and asked, "Lost Thunderbird photo found?" None of them shows a bird pinned to the wall of a barn. One shows 5 men standing behind a giant bird on the ground, another shows 8 Civil War soldiers around a bird at their feet, and the third is a drawing showing 8 men holding a big bird upside down. A lively response ensued on the website. Kim wrote she once had a book with the missing photo, but she searched the book and it isn't there anymore. "I suspect that someone with the ability to go back in time stopped the photo from being taken," she mused. After that occurred, the photo disappeared from all the books and magazines it was ever in. Tube responded, "Before we indulge in Fortean space-time warps as explanations for missing photographs, I'd like to suggest that those curious about these things to research false memory and confabulation as likely candidates to explain this mystery." To that, M. Valdemar responded, "Tube, I entirely agree with you about false memory and confabulation. And yet, there's some really powerful mojo at work with the Thunderbird photo." My first thought was, oh yeah, I've seen that. I'm willing to concede that there is no such photo. Nonetheless, I find it fascinating that so many people, including me, should find the suggestion so irresistibly strong. Mark Hall believes the description of the photo is so vivid that it has created a shared memory of something that does not exist. He wrote in his book, Thunderbirds, America's Living Legends of Giant Birds. Think about it a second. Can't you just see the guys, all in cowboy hats and boots, some with guns on their hips, some with mustaches, most looking grungy, standing next to an unpainted, or badly peeling barn with a big bird nailed to the side? It's not hard to see. As Hall puts it, the status of the infamous Thunderbird photograph has remained the same for years. A lot of people think they have seen the picture. Everyone wants to see it. But no one can produce a copy. The bottom line seems clear. The evidence is overwhelming that this photograph just never existed. Was there a Thunderbird? It's from Indian folklore we get the idea of giant bird-like creatures called Thunderbirds. Some believe they truly exist, others are convinced they are mythical, like the unicorn. We don't know if the Tombstone Epitaph reporter had his tongue in his cheek when he reported on the killing of a Thunderbird in 1890, but we do know a Los Angeles newspaper took the report seriously. Again, thanks to Horace Bell's book, Commenting on the story in the Arizona paper, a Los Angeles paper in May 1890, said, "Such a bird, reptile or monster was seen about 3 years ago, by 3 Mexican rancheros living near Elizabeth Lake." Bell reported this flying amphibious monster was seen several times from 1881 to 1886 in the Elizabeth Lake area of California. But not long thereafter it was seen emerging and flying away eastward. Since then it has never been seen in its native valley, because it was found and killed 800 miles from Lake Elizabeth, as is proved by the article that appeared in the Epitaph, Tombstone, Arizona. Bell wasn't the first, nor would he be the last, to report on Thunderbirds as real creatures. So maybe there really was a giant bird in Arizona territory, at the end of the 19th century, and maybe 2 ranchers really did track it down and shoot it, and maybe they did come into town and get some prominent men to go with them to bring it back. But whatever happened next was so unspectacular, so uninteresting and so unremarkable that nobody spoke of it again. Would that have been the response if there really had been a dead dinosaur-like bird outside of town? Hardly. So you're left thinking the story of the Tombstone Thunderbird was the fantasy of a bored reporter on a spring day when nothing else was going on in that down-and-out town. Even knowing all this, Troy Taylor hasn't called it a day on this Old West cold case. Are Thunderbirds and mysterious flying creatures actually real? He asks in his book. Such creatures remain a mystery, but one thing is sure, the sightings have continued over the years. So keep that in mind the next time that you are standing in an open field and a large, dark shadow suddenly fills the sky overhead. Was that just a cloud passing in front of the sun, or something else? Nor has Taylor thrown in the towel on the missing Thunderbird photo. What if the photo does exist and it's out there, just waiting to be discovered in some dusty garage, overflowing file cabinet or musty basement? He writes, "I, for one, haven't given up quite yet, and I have a feeling that I am not the only one who is still out there looking." You know he's right about that. 8. Billy the Kid's death. Sheriff Pat Garrett shoots Henry McCarty, popularly known as Billy the Kid, to death at the Maxwell Ranch in New Mexico. Garrett, who had been tracking the kid for 3 months after the gunslinger had escaped from prison only days before his scheduled execution, got a tip that Billy was holed up with friends. While Billy was gone, Garrett waited in the dark in his bedroom. When Billy entered, Garrett shot him to death. Back on April 1, 1878, Billy the Kid ambushed Sheriff William Brady and one deputy in Lincoln, New Mexico, after ranch owner John Tunstall had been murdered. Billy had worked at Tunstall's ranch and was outraged by his employer's slaying, vowing to hunt down every man responsible. Sheriff Brady and his men, who had been affiliated with rival ranchers, were involved with the gang that killed Tunstall on February 18. Billy's retaliatory attack left Brady and Deputy George Heineman dead. Although only 18 years old at the time, Billy had now committed as many as 17 murders. Following his indictment for the murder of Sheriff Brady, Billy the Kid was the most wanted man in the West. Evading posses sent to capture him, he eventually struck a deal with the new governor of New Mexico, in return for his testimony against the perpetrators of the ongoing ranch wars in the state. Billy would be set free. Although he kept his word about the testimony, he began to distrust the promise that he would be released, and so he escaped. Once a fugitive, Billy killed a few more men, including the gunslinger Joe Grant, who had challenged him to a showdown. Legend has it that Billy managed to get a hold of Grant's gun prior to the fight, and made sure that an empty chamber was up first in the man's revolver. When it came time to fire, only Billy's gun went off and Grant was left dead. Legendary Sheriff Pat Garrett finally brought Billy the Kid in to stand trial. The judge sentenced Billy the Kid to hang, "until you are dead, dead, dead." Billy reportedly responded, "And you can go to hell, hell, hell." 2 weeks before his scheduled execution, Billy escaped, killing 2 guards in the process. Garrett mounted yet another posse to bring in the kid. After tracing him to the Maxwell Ranch, Garrett shot him to death. No legal charges were brought against him since the killing was ruled a justifiable homicide. 9. The Desert Ship. Of all the legends about lost and found, and lost again treasures in the Southwest, there is none more mystifying than the enduring tale of a large sailing vessel which lies, full of riches, somewhere in the restless sands of California's Salton Sea Basin, toward the northern end of the Sonora Desert. Implausible as it sounds, the wreck of an ocean-going ship 100 miles, or more inland from either the Pacific or the Gulf of California, the story has persisted for centuries in reports from Indian peoples, Spanish explorers, prospectors, migrants and treasure hunters. How could a ship come to rest on desert sand so far from saltwater? One explanation holds that an exceptionally large tide from the Gulf of California may have collided with an exceptionally heavy runoff from the Colorado River at the delta, producing a flood which broke through the land barrier to the Salton Sea. The cresting waters could have carried the ship over the natural dam and down into the Salton Sea Basin. The flood would have then retreated, leaving the vessel stranded. That scenario rests on an unlikely coincidence of events, but the topography of the area, the potential for monumental flooding, the early explorations by Spanish vessels and a tragedy in the 20th century have all given some currency to the possibility of a shipwreck in the desert. The Gulf of California and the Salton Sea were once connected, before the Colorado River Delta emerged to separate them. In historic times, the Gulf of California's incoming tides and the river's outflow produced world-class tidal bores, or walls of water moving up the stream bed. The basin, at more than 270 feet below sea level, would serve as a ready receptacle for floodwaters. Spanish vessels sailed into the delta area in the 16th century, seeking treasures and ocean passages. An exceptionally large tidal bore moved up the delta stream bed in 1922, capsizing a steamship and killing 86 of 125 passengers. Tidal bores no longer occur in the delta area, because the river's water is totally depleted by agricultural and municipal usage before it reaches the Gulf. It would seem most likely that the ship, if it exists, would be a Spanish vessel, but some have speculated that it might be a craft from the navy of King Solomon, or the 10 lost tribes of Israel, or a warring people from the Indian Ocean, or a band of pirates. In an alternate storyline, which appeared in Antonio de Fierro Blanco's book, The Journey of the Flame, a celebrated Spanish coastal pilot named Iturbe sailed his 50-ton, pearl-laden ship from the Pacific through a natural channel into the Salton Sea in the year 1615. He hoped to find a passage, the fabled Straits of Anian, to the Atlantic. After 3 months, he gave up the search. When he tried to return through the natural channel to the Pacific, he found that a powerful storm had triggered a mudslide, which blocked his escape, or in another version the waters of the Salton Sea had fallen, leaving his ship stranded, her keel buried in a sandbar. Iturbe had to abandon his vessel, standing upright as though she were still under sail, and the great treasure. A century and a half later, according to Fierro Blanco, a mule driver named Tiburcio Mancerna, who accompanied the famous Juan Baptista de Anza in his search of a land route from Sonora to Alta California, claimed that, "I was sent to the right of the course, seeking a road to the ocean. Traveling by night because of the heat, I stumbled upon an ancient ship, and in its hold were so many pearls as is beyond imagination. Fevered by this wealth, I took what I could carry, abandoned my comrades, and riding toward the ocean as far as my mule could carry me, I climbed the precipitous western mountains on foot. Fed by Indians, I at last reached San Luis Rey Mission. Since then I have spent my life searching for this ship." While in the camp of Don Fermin Sanjudo, a Spanish explorer, Mancerna whispered the story to Juan Colorado, who finally revealed the secret on his 104th birthday. In a puzzling conclusion to the story, Fierro Blanco said, "I have known, as a boy, natives from every tribe on the Baja California Peninsula, and they taught me much of great value, but never did one lie to me. Some of their stories I did not then believe, but each as tested proved to be true in all parts." In yet another story, this one published by the Los Angeles Star on November 12, 1870, A man named Charlie Klusker and a party started out again, this morning to find the mythical ship upon the desert this side of Dos Palmas, located on the northeast side of the Salton Sea Basin. Charlie made the trip 3 or 4 weeks ago, but made the wrong chute, sick, and mired his wagon 15 miles from Dos Palmas. He is satisfied from information he has received from the Indians that the ship is no myth. He is prepared with a good wagon, pack saddles, and planks to cross the sandy ground. The Star printed another story a few weeks later, on December 1st, saying that Charlie Klusker and party returned from the desert yesterday, just as we were going to press. They had a hard time of it, but they have succeeded in their effort. The ship has been found. Charlie returns to the desert today, to reap the fruition of his labors. He was without food or water, under a hot broiling sun for over 24 hours, and came near perishing. Apparently, Klusker did indeed set out again for what he described as an ornately carved Spanish galleon, complete with crosses and broken masts, mostly buried in the sand several miles from the nearest water, but no one ever heard from Charlie Klusker again. The question remains, is there a lost ship in the desert sands of Salton Sea? It seems like a fantasy, a scene from Gilbert and Sullivan's Pirates of Penzance, but the persistence, similarity and endurance of the story in both Native American and frontier lore cannot be completely discounted. Perhaps one day, when the right conditions of wind and shifting sands combine, an ornately carved hull and a mast of a Spanish galleon, filled with treasure, will emerge from its dusty tomb.